episode 16. If you've been following along, you should start to see something resembling a course now. In the in the past couple videos, we've been laying down the fairway, laying down the green, contouring around the bunkers, and what we're left with is a pretty good looking course here. So the next step is to get rid of all this fairway burn and to lay down our different cuts of rough. So it's actually quite a bit to talk about. This may be a longer video. You have a couple different options when it comes to your rough. Whenever I lay rough, I like to use this tool again. It's a pretty versatile tool. You have some different options. You can either lay the rough. I feel like this is the more conventional option. You can either lay the rough and then lay a layer of heavy rough on the back of it. Or you can if I find it here, you can just lay a layer of light rough and leave it at that. So I'm gonna talk about the advantages, disadvantages of each one here real quick. So this is probably the most conventional one. You have a layer of light rough. It's a little punishing. If you go into this and the ball may stop, it'll prevent it from rolling into heavy rough. It's not as hard to hit out of light rough. It is pretty hard to hit out of heavy rough. So if you're going to lay this, you're going to want to decide how thick you want to lay the light rough, because the bigger of a swatch you have here, the harder it's going to be to punish golfers who do stray from the fairway. Since I make my fairways already pretty wide, I don't want to be too wide with my rough, depending on what I'm doing. But anyways, just something to think about. Another kind of downfall about laying rough and then heavy rough, depending on how much you care, is on the border in this game. Oh, get away. On the border in this game, there's always, you can kind of see it. It kind of zigzags. I'm trying to get a picture without that showing up, but it kind of zigzags. I actually laid a pretty straight edge, then laid a straight edge on top of it, but for whatever reason, it's having trouble melding, so it kind of looks a little awkward. If you simply lay the heavy rough, the edge of it is very tall, so you actually have this very stark contrast between where the fairway and the heavy rough is. If you're fine with that, that's okay. But compared to the light rough, it just seems to kind of be more jarring with the effect. The advantages to this is this can create a very penalizing course for golfers who play it, because as soon as they roll into it, I think depending on how fast the ball's going, they may be hitting with a 60-70% of how much they're supposed to hit. You may choose to just lay light rough and then not lay any heavy rough behind it. Anytime you lay rough, it is actually going to give you this very tiny string of heavy rough behind it, just to help it blend into the natural earth. If you do this, one of the advantages is that you will actually have more nature closer to the course, so it'll actually seem like a very I don't know, woodsy or rustic style course. It won't be very open, as opposed to, see, if you have this, there's really not a whole lot of, this is where the earth kind of starts, so you have a very open course. It's really up to you. The disadvantages to this one is this is really not very punishing. If somehow the golfer does manage to get out of this light rough and exit over here into the natural earth, the natural earth is actually less punishing than the heavy rough would be. So the other advantage here is that this is not nearly of a squiggly line going through as this one is, where you lay heavy rough and it kind of has those little wiggles to it. So it is completely up to you. When it comes to actually laying it, and I'm going to delete this while I talk about it, when it comes to actually laying it, I think it's very important that you give yourself a very consistent look no matter what you do. When we were talking about auto-generated courses, they were very wavy bands of rough, and it just didn't look incredibly professional. So whatever you do, you want it to be consistent. This is actually where I get a little meticulous. There are definitely some meticulous designers out there. This is probably the most meticulous thing I do. But I like to use the design tool and actually make sure that my first cut of rough, no matter what, is actually the same. So I'm going to spare you guys from doing this. I'll actually do this off air, going the whole way around. But I actually start from the edge of the fairway burn and decide how long I want my fairway rough to be going the entire way around. And for this, I'm going to make it 3. 3 yards. Going at different intervals. And then later, I will actually use that same brush to connect those points. At the end, I think it looks really good. It's incredibly consistent. If you have a good eye and you want to skip this step, absolutely, please feel free. I understand that this takes a long time and honestly looks kind of crazy. But that's a very... I will later go back and add some heavy rough on the back of it, probably about yay big. The only other thing about this that I want to make sure I talk about is in these little areas that we've left standing, the next step that I would do before I even go through and do my little method here is fill these areas in. That'll get rid of the fairway burn. I'm going to end up doing this for all of them. But then you want to, you don't necessarily have to, but I enjoy surrounding the bunker with the same cut of rough. Towards the back here, I may let light rough touch it, but for the game, there's always this stark line of where the light rough ends and the heavy rough begins, and I just think it looks better. So what I'll actually do is I'll actually trace the bunker using this same tool that I always use, and it's actually going to give me a nice outline of the bunker. And I think that looks really nice. So I'll go through later and I'll sculpt that. Off air, I'm actually going to do all of this to the entire thing. I'm going to add a cut of light rough and a cut of heavy rough. And in the next video, I will see you then.